and welcome to Zilog and Moto. In today's episode, as you can tell by the title, we are still not looking at great soccer. Either of them. Which is unfortunate because when I finally sat down to write the script for this episode, the Women's World Cup had just been won by the Americans. And so, whenever I finally get around to that game, I'll have missed the boat a bit. But instead, we're going with a game that I actually just picked up and added to the collection about 2 weeks ago. But, this week's game's still soccer related. How is that, you ask? Well, while this week's game was only called Marko in the US for its release, in Europe, the game is known as Marko's Magic Football. I can only assume that the Magic Football was dropped due to the fact that, obviously, football is not football in both places. Of course, that begs the question, why didn't they just change the name to Marko's Magic Soccer Ball? It just doesn't roll off the tongue as well, does it? And I'm guessing that Domark was probably hoping that Marko might just become one of those names, like Sonic, Mario, Bubsy, Arrow, where the character's name would be enough to establish the franchise. That didn't happen here, but I tend to think it's more about the contents of the game than a simplistic name. If you're not familiar with the game, Marko's a platformer with a bit of a twist. Rather than featuring a hedgehog or a plumber that dispatches his enemies by jumping on them, Marko instead uses his soccer ball to make his way through the levels. You see, Marko's soccer ball has been infused with seemingly magical properties due to coming in contact with a toxic sludge that's been produced by a Colonel Brown, who is apparently not only military related but also owns a toy factory. I wouldn't get too caught up in the plot. It's pretty worthless and just provides a rudimentary framework for playing the game. Having said all that, let's go ahead and take a look. Here is Marko, as you can plainly see by the name in the big block letters across the top of the box. Right below the title, you have the cartoonish representation of Marko and his soccer ball, with plenty of the game's enemies in the background. If you look close, you can see a clown. You can see a sludge monster. You can see one of the flamethrower enemies. And a hedgehog. And then also Colonel Brown's back here as well. There's also a canister of toxic sludge right there as well, which are all fundamental parts of certain levels, and not just a story prop. The cover is colorful and well drawn, and I could see this sticking out on a shelf at Electronics Boutique back in the day. Down in the bottom corner, unsurprisingly, this game got a GA rating by the VRC. As looks of the game are definitely aimed at a younger audience. No blood here, and definitely no fisticuffs. The box itself is in pretty good shape. Hang tab intact at the top. And if you look down at the bottom of the spine, you will see where the corners of the inner cover are worn down a little bit. Unfortunately, before I got a hold of it, the inner cover was slid down a little bit, so I had to slide that back up in there so that it wouldn't get damaged any further. But other than that, it's in pretty good shape. There's no water damage or sun damage or anything like that. As we flip over the back, it's a pretty standard back cover. 4 nice screenshots of the game at the various different levels. They're a little bit grainy, but I've seen worse. Also some quotes from magazines about the game, which I think seemed to be a bit unusual back in the day. It seems a little bit gauche even now. Opening the game, you'll see the cartridge is in really good shape. You can barely see that Marko running across the top there. And the manual, it's a little bit rougher. I'm not even sure how the binding of the manual gets bent in that many spots. But, oh well. The good news is the inside is fully intact. The manual provides some nice color for the game, including a whole introductory page for the backstory of the game if you're too impatient to watch the cutscene intro. There's also a nice section that talks about some of the enemies in the game. here, this introducing the cast section. But it's kind of weird that they only talked about half of the enemies. I guess they want to leave some of it to be a surprise, but I don't know. It just didn't really make sense to me. They had a good thing going there, and they just kind of left it in the middle. I don't really understand why those enemies were the only ones that get singled out and mentioned, with the obvious exception of Silent the Hedgehog and obvious Poke It, Sonic the Hedgehog. I feel like what they did with the manual was good, but it could have been 4 pages longer and perhaps had more artwork. Instead, you might have like some drawings or, other things. Instead, you just have like a bunch of random scenes from the game in here that don't really have anything to do with what's being talked about on the page. Okay, enough pregame. Let's see whether Marko has a golden boot or deserves a red card. And yes, I know that was awful. I'm in full-on dad joke territory. You're just going to have to deal with it. One of the things I think an action-adventure game needs to have, even back in the 8 to 16-bit era, is a good story. And I don't mean just an implied story, talked about on the back of a game box or in the manual, but an in-game story, with text and either animated or static cutscenes. Marko gets a checkbox for that, with a lengthy intro detailing the backstory of the game, with some nice text and well-drawn animated sequences living up to the line from the back of the box, "Imagine playing a cartoon." Once the intro is done, you're brought to an options screen. Most of the stuff in the options screen is pretty standard, but then there's a nice feature tucked in here to allow players to get used to controlling Marko in his backyard. I like this, because the gameplay here is pretty unique with the use of the soccer ball, and most people are definitely not going to be able to just pick up this game and play it well without familiarizing themselves a bit. Another very important part of the options screen that should not be missed is Enter Password. As you progress through the 13 levels of Marko, sometimes after you complete a level, you'll be given a password, which can be entered here to continue from the last level. Technically, every level has a password, but only certain ones are given in game. The rest are considered cheats. Using the password system, whether you cheat or earn your way through the levels, is a must. While Marko is a GA-rated game, and definitely has a cutesy look in places to appeal to younger players, this game is hard, unfairly so in certain places. To have any chance of completing the game, you'll be going into this Enter Password screen again and again to attempt to make your way through. It would have been nice for the game to provide a continue option, even if it was just limited to a few, but at least the password screen effectively gives you infinite continues. I would have preferred for all levels to have visible passwords though, as I don't like cheating in these games, and having all levels have passwords make this game seem like it was the plan all along, but they just decided to remove some of them to make the game harder. I don't mind a game being hard as long as it's beatable, as we saw back in 3 Ninjas Kick Back, providing multiple difficulty modes. But Marko doesn't have that type of option. As far as the game being unfair goes, I ran into 2 main problems as I played the game. The first issue is that certain enemies will shoot projectiles at you. Not uncommon and pretty standard in a platform. However, in Marko, enemies can shoot at you from off-screen as long as they're near the screen, leading to plenty of WTF moments. Also, the hitboxes on certain projectiles are huge, much larger than the sprites that represent them. I had a specific problem with the snakes, which can shoot 1 or 2 slow-moving blue balls at you. These balls move fairly slowly, and in a normal game, you'd be able to avoid them without no issue. However, over and over again, I think I've dodged these balls, either by stepping out of the way of the path or ducking under them, and guess what? They still hit you, even when they clearly sailed over your head. It's one thing having to adjust to an enemy that's slightly off screen, lots of games are like that, but to dodge a projectile and still take a hit when you have precious little life to begin with, that's not cool. The second problem again relates to inaccuracies with surfaces, but this time it's more related to the ground or your soccer ball. One of the gameplay mechanics that's prevalent through the game is the need to use your ball as a trampoline, bouncing higher and higher to reach platforms that normally would be out of reach. This works fine when you're on land, However, Marko can't swim, and both pits of water and sludge pop up in certain levels, meaning you have to make your way across the pit. One of the ways across those pits, even mentioned in the manual, is to kick your ball into the pit, and then jump to the ball, then use the ball to bounce over to the other side. However, you will find that this is near impossible, as just when you think you're landing on the ball, you'll either misjudge it and land too short or too far, falling in the water or sludge to instant death. It can be done, but you'll find it's usually easier to run and jump across these pits instead. Except if you go that route, you better make sure you fully clear the pit, because if you land on what appears to be the edge of the next platform, well, forget it. It's instant death time again. And if you accidentally hold the jump button down after landing, you'll immediately jump again, potentially into a hazard which might knock you back into the body of water you just tried to jump over. I'm all for precision jumping and timing in platformers, but when you miss a landing when clearly you shouldn't have based on the on-screen graphics, that's a huge problem and totally derails the fun element of the game. Before we go any further, I should probably discuss the control scheme other than the ability to use your ball as a trampoline. It's definitely a bit unusual, to be sure. As you can probably guess based on all the soccer ball talk, Marko's soccer ball is used for all attack purposes in the game. Marko can kick the ball in a number of different ways to dispatch enemies, and use his head as well to direct the ball towards enemies above him. After kicking or heading the ball, if he doesn't get the ball back at his feet by moving to where it landed, you can hit the C button to magically warp the ball back to your feet. This is very important. Seeing as Marko is a little kid, he is defenseless without the ball. Moving without the ball at your feet is incredibly risky, as there are enemies all over the place in the levels, and frequently they will appear from seemingly out of nowhere just off the screen. I actually took to moving through the levels that featured horizontal sections by constantly kicking the ball ahead of me, and then warping it back, in an effort to kill enemies before they even appeared on the screen, because for enemies that take multiple hits to kill, waiting until you can see them might be too late. The control scheme is a bit unwieldy to be sure, but it's not specifically bad, and definitely makes the game pretty unique. Unfortunately, with as difficult as the game is in places, that unwieldiness will definitely lead to frustration. As I worked my way through the game, after more than a few visits to the password screen, especially on level 9, I did finally make it to the last level, and I'm sure any seasoned gamer would be able to do the same. However, doing so without cheating basically requires you to memorize the layouts of certain levels and enemy placement in those levels. When I got to the point where I could make it through level 9 without dying, I did finally allow myself to cheat and start from level 10 instead of constantly going back through level 9 again, just so I could hopefully make it through the end of the game for this review. And I did. I made it to level 13, which thankfully does have a non-cheating password. However, level 13 is pretty crazy and long. Plenty of dead-end pathways that, while they may have hidden bonuses for you, also increase your risk of taking extra unnecessary hits. And to combat this, the developers did include a decent amount of hearts throughout the level, which give you 1 unit of health back. After playing around at the level for a while, I finally managed to make it to the final boss, Colonel Brown, and then proceeded to die, as you might expect. The boss fight is a pain, and even described in one of the facts on GameFAQs as nearly impossible. The main problem I have with it is that the boss will spend a lot of time off screen, and you'll have to run around to try to find him, just so you can hit him, which usually means you'll get hit as well by trying to seek him out. But beyond the bizarre choice to have the final boss travel off screen, there are 2 other problems with the culmination of the game, one major and one minor. The minor issue to me is the game's checkpoint system, or in this case, the lack thereof in important locations. As you travel through the levels, you'll find a tourist that will take a picture as you walk past them, and this serves as your checkpoint in the level. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, commonly in games, no matter the genre, if you're approaching a big or final boss, there will be one of these checkpoints right before the final rumble. Not in Marko. In Marko, your closest checkpoint will take you back a few minutes into the level and require you to attempt to avoid several sets of enemies and hazards to get back to the boss area each time you die. This is more annoying than an actual problem, which is why I label it minor. However, what's not minor is that when you proceed through the levels, there are lots of things to collect. stars, pop cans, hearts, extra lives, etc. Again, pretty normal, right? However, in Marko, when you die and restart at a checkpoint, anything you've collected previously in the level is gone, both from the level and your inventory. I can understand losing what you'd collected, but if you're going to lose your items, it should at least put them back in the level for you to try to collect them again. And adding insult to injury, any enemies you previously killed, well, they don't stay dead, they all come back. But now, since you can't collect any bonuses or power-ups again, you'll have an uphill climb to complete the level. In levels before the last one, this can be chalked up to a minor annoyance and a poor gameplay choice. But in that last one, remember how I said that last level had more hearts than usual to help you get through the level? Well, if you collect them all, and then get to Colonel Brown and die, you're screwed, because all the hearts are gone until you start the level over again from the password screen. You more or less have to memorize a path through the final level, get through the level while only getting hit a few times so that you can collect enough hearts to counteract those hits and still be maxed out, and then hopefully beat Colonel Brown all in one life. In short, screw this noise. Now that I've roasted the game pretty good, let me discuss some of the positives. The earlier bit about imagine playing a cartoon, well, that's pretty accurate. The game is colorful and has some great character animation. And the game has tons of enemies, so there was a lot of work done on the art side to animate all those characters. No palette swapping here, except for maybe the slime monster that composes other enemies. The 13 levels in the game take place in North Sterlington, the sewers, the construction site, the forest, a circus, and finally the toy factory. And each of those levels features wildly different graphics and backgrounds, with some interesting use of parallax scrolling, extending even into the rarely used foreground during sewer levels. This is definitely one of those games where they figured out the art they needed before figuring out the game, and it shows. From an audio perspective, the game isn't bad. I wouldn't say I'm blown away by it either, though. There's certainly a lot better soundtracks on the Genesis. The instrumentation isn't bad, and there's not too many shrill synths. In fact, if I'd say anything, the soundtrack is a bit bass heavy. I guess the songs never really struck a chord with me, pardon the pun. The music does its job of being in the background of the levels, but they're also fairly repetitive, with usually just a few riffs repeated over and over. As far as the sound effects go, again, they're good, but other than the meow of the cat or the tinnish crash when you destroy a toxic waste bin, none of them are very memorable either. Well, there is also the beeping of Captain Kirk's tricorder, because he makes an appearance in the game, or someone that looks very much like him to get around copyright rules, in one of the strangest game cross-references I think I've ever seen. But, like the background music, there's not much here that you haven't heard before. Literally, in some cases, I could swear that some of the sound effects were borrowed from some other game. All in all, I'm giving Marko a 2. But if you really like platformers, give it a 3. While that probably seems a bit harsh, and not every platformer can be Sonic or Mario, I think it's deserved. The graphics pull it up from being a lowly 1 star. As you can tell, there was at least substantial effort put into that aspect. The graphics only take you so far. The shoddy hit detection and controls that always feel just a bit off make the actual gameplay more frustrating than fun. I like the original concept, and you can tell there was definitely some imagination put into the game, but there's just too many things in the negative column to balance it out. Marko is only for platform diehards, or gamers that are bored and possibly want to try something out that flew somewhat under the radar back in the day. Okay, that was Marko. I've got to say, doing this review was a bit painful, but I did finally manage to beat the game after I decided I was all but not even going to bother. But when I sat down and recorded the in-game footage, I figured I'd give it just one more shot. And just shy of 3 hours later, boom, ending screen. Reading the FAQ and then watching a video of a playthrough on YouTube definitely helped. It does make me kind of wonder what the first beatable game is going to be that I'm just going to decide isn't worth the trouble. Because I'm sure it's coming. Tune in next week when we finally take a look at Great Soccer now in honor of the U.S. women's national team taking the World Cup. It's definitely going to be an interesting video, as we're going to be taking a look at both versions of Great Soccer and the Sega Sports Pad controller. Until next time, remember, whatever you're playing, have fun and be excellent to each other. Later.